Okay, hello everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for this, the second event in the BOBAB Lightning Lecture Series. We will be hosting these events on a monthly basis, covering all sorts of topics ranging from public health, renewable energy, finance and agriculture, all the way through to space science and satellites. The idea behind our Lightning Lecture series is to give you access to the insights and expertise of exciting cutting-edge academics and entrepreneurs, followed by meaningful discussion, all done in a flash, so to speak. 20 minutes of lecture followed by 20 minutes of discussion. We like to keep it simple because simple is often the most effective. And to that end, we invite you to ask questions and encourage you not to be shy. The whole point of this is to keep it interactive and to have an open discussion. I'm happy to admit I'm no subject matter expert on today's discussion points, although I wish I was. And I've certainly asked Julius a layman's question or two, so rest assured no question is too basic or silly to be shared here, and we're really keen for you to participate. Now I'd like to introduce today's event and our keynote speaker for today, Mr. Julius Akinyemi. Julius is the chairman, founder and CEO of Ewing Corp, the mobile commodity marketplace, an initiative for unleashing the wealth of nations, which aims to create next generation capital market infrastructure. Julius is also the entrepreneur in residence at MIT's Media Lab, where his mission is the commercialization of technology innovation to empower developing economies. Prior to this, Julius was also the Global Director of Emerging Technologies at PepsiCo and the Senior VP for Emerging Technologies and Wireless Business Technology at Wells Fargo Bank. Now today we'll be exploring the fascinating world of biodiversity, and there's no denying that Africa's biodiversity is amongst the richest and most varied in the world, with the continent's living organisms accounting for something like a quarter of all global biodiversity. However, a complex configuration of challenges and opportunities exists to ensure the debate around conservation and exploitation of biodiversity are often heated, to say the least. These include challenges around mitigating against environmental degradation, leveraging the medicinal, commercial and research potential of a particular region's flora and fauna, and protecting the interests of local communities, the knowledge of which is often how modern applications for biodiversity are discovered. And central to addressing and capitalizing on these challenges and opportunities will be securing the rights to resources, knowledge and land that have been alienated over the centuries. In this talk, Julius will be introducing the Nature E-Bank, a new initiative he's developed which seeks to address this imbalance, enabling the cataloguing of endemic plants based on a new legal framework developed with WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, for sovereign IP of continents, the continent's plants. Julius, without further ado, over to you, please.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to join you, and I look forward to a good discussion. As Nick already mentioned, we'll be looking at the Nature E-Bank. And to start that, I will share my screen with you and we can start the conversation. I look forward to all the questions. All right. Yeah, almost there. Oops, almost there. There we go. So again, Nick, thank you very much. So the Nature E-Bank is something that
sorry to interrupt. We can't. Sorry, we can't actually see your screen. Can you have another go at sharing?
Okay, let's try that again. Sorry about that.
All right.
Nice. Yeah, share screen. No, not that one. Give me a minute. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's see. There we go. So let me go back here. Yes, please. Hopefully that will work this time. I think we got it.
Yes,
okay?
That's it. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So briefly, the Unleashing the Wealth in Nations is an initiative that I started at MIT. And the idea was to look at the dormant assets of developing world. Some of you may be familiar with the work done by the Peruvian economist, Hernando de Soto, who worked on the mystery of capital, why capitalism works in the West and not anywhere else. So the idea is to be able to look at some of these dormant assets and find a way to mobilize them. So the mission of UN is to transform dormant assets into fungible, useful assets, enabling collateral management and financial access in developing economies. Now, there's a lot of things packed into that. So Hernando de Soto, when he talked about dormant assets, he actually talked about dead assets, meaning when you look, I think about year 2000, he did a sample around the world, cataloging, developing world assets that are not mobilized. And they call them the dead assets because when you have an asset like, let's say, a property, a house, in the Western world, we all know how we leverage that, and we have the equity in the house. We can borrow against it, and we can do a lot of things. Businesses thrive on that, and there's a correlation between property ownership and GDP production, because small businesses are able to leverage that to improve their net worth. So when we look at that, our take on it is there is a huge portion of that come from African countries because we haven't done enough in cataloging our assets, making sure we can leverage them, and giving the value, especially to the rural farmers and rural regions where this has been done. So included in the dormant assets, is the indigenous plants. And as most of you know, indigenous plants from time immemorial has been used for medicinal purposes, for pharmaceutical, drug discovery, for cosmetics, and so on and so forth. But there is no formal trading platform that says, okay, when L'Oreal leaves France to go and get some indigenous plant for cosmetic in Mauritius or Reunion, that there is a fair price. So except, again, we will talk about some of the guiding principles. The World Intellectual Property Office created the Nagoya Protocol, and we will talk about that. I gave a reference on that at the end. And the Nagoya Protocol basically is a protocol that gives access and benefit sharing, which has to be ratified by each country, and which also has to be, that country has to be a participating party in the contract. And I will talk about a little bit of the complexity as we go on. So what we try to do, again, with the advent of emerging technologies in form of the blockchain that is transparent, immutable, and easy access. That's what we try to leverage in order to build the e-bank. There has been a lot of registry in the past. Actually, before the digital currency boom most recently, I was actually thinking about creating this platform, with a mesh network at the back end, but with blockchain, which is a distributed ledger technology that actually gave us a simpler and easier implementation track. So I thought it's important to put relatively, when Anando de Soto when he performed his pilot around the year 2000, there was about $9.8 trillion of dormant assets at that time. And from there, we were able to estimate, given the land area, the population, expected growth, and improvement, we believe about 1 billion of that, was African attribute, meaning how much of it we can attribute to African countries. But that was 2000. And in 2016, a good friend of mine wrote a book called The Truth Machine, The Future of Blockchain and Everything. And in that book, it was quoted that Anando de Soto actually updated his figure as of 2016 environment. That figure of 9.8 trillion has now grown to 20 trillion. Okay, let me make sure I specify that. From 9.8 trillion in year 2000 about, in 2016 is now 20 trillion. So you can imagine how much of that is now African countries. The 9.8 was a 1 billion attribute, our most conservative estimate at that time. And again, I want to make sure that we also look at some of the things that are going to affect how we do this. You have mobile penetration that is increasing by the day. More than 12% of sub-Saharan Africa has mobile money. So all of these things are going to play a part on how we do this. So in order to unlock the dormant asset for indigenous plants and the small farmers, what we have done is to focus primarily on the elements. What are the elements that will get us there? Okay, we look at the indigenous people and the native plant database, which is what the Nature e-Bank is about. And also we look at the crop production, the agricultural commodity production. How do we bring all of this into a global marketplace where people can trade, where they can come together and get a fair price? If we can do that successfully, as we all know, there will be efficiency and there will be an enormous growth in the GDP of the continent. So that's what we are trying to focus on. And this is how we try to do it. So this page basically sums up what we have done and where we are going. So the indigenous plants are used for obviously pharmaceutical research, medicinal, cosmetics, and so on. But the challenge is how we actually assign a sovereign asset to these plants. Because there is no we don't have a formalized infrastructure for licensing and so on. So about 3 years ago, or maybe 4 years now, both myself and the sixth president of Mauritius Island, Excellency Amina Gore Pakim, some of you may know, both of us wrote a proposal to the Director General of WIPO, Mr. Francis Gorey, and they actually invited me over for a couple of days. I did a workshop. I took them through why we believe that there should be a sovereign IP for plants that are indigenous or endemic to different regions of the world, even though we are more concerned about the African continent. So it took a long time, but gladly, I'm actually happy to say that as of 2 years ago, for the first time, WIPO actually drafted a legal framework that will give a sovereign IP to some of these, to all of the plants, as a matter of fact. But as you will expect of any UN agency, which WIPO is, they have to circulate that around members and so on and so forth. It will take its own course before it actually take effect. But they already ascertained to us that yes, the legal framework is written, and I have a copy of it, of course, which is not legally, it's not officially published yet by WIPO. So, but they gave us the authority to be able to code that, and it's something that I'm very, very proud of. So we hope that comes to play. So when we do record the plants, how do we ensure the integrity of the database? So again, for some of us that are familiar with the blockchain technology, we will be using the smart contract, for a sovereign IP. Each one of the plants are going to be registered, and they're going to be time-stamped and geolocation stamped and so on and so forth. But one of the complexities of what we do is also to make sure that when somebody register a plant, we also make sure that that plant and the person is attested to. We want somebody to say, okay, yes, I know that person and I know the plant and I know it's there. So we have a whole process that we already went through, both in Senegal, where I first did the pilot, as well as in Mauritius, where we did the most recent pilot. So there's an attestation process. It's not just Julius going in and saying, oh, well, I have this cassava that does this, therefore, I have an indigenous plant. No, we have people that are respected in the society that will attest to what I say. And based on that, we build their reputation index, which is what we call the trustworthiness of each individual. This is another measure, or this is something else we can discuss in a future stage. Okay, so this is an example of some of the plans that we went through about a year and a half ago. And as you can see on the screen, the left side is the species and the family name of each plant. Endemic in terms of they are specific and restricted to certain region, where you have M, that would be for Mauritius, and the RE is for Reunion, the island of Reunion. Each plant are endemic to each of those islands. And of course, you have the local name, the vernacular name. The first one, for example, Bois Manyak, which is cassava wood in English, and is used for reducing fever. And you can go down the list from rheumatism to asthma to stomach relief or urinary disorder. So in effect, we basically have these assets and this value proposition to the world that I believe we never actually registered and publicized globally, so we can benefit from the economic empowerment of it. So this is just an example of what we already registered, that we already went through. So the next one, when we registered them, what we did was to create a phytochemical property of each of the plants. What are the chemical attributes, the alkaline level, the glycerin level. So all of these things make them unique, as to what we use them for and how we use them. And our goal eventually is to also create the DNA signature. So eventually, if anyone takes them, let's say you take one from Mauritius or from Reunion, I plant them in the US, obviously that changes the DNA. And we want to be able to backtrace the DNA of any of the endemic plants or indigenous plants, excuse me, so that in future, as we move forward, anyone that uses them, we will be able to trace back to the region of origin for either, for copyright values or valuation and so on and so forth. So we are not there yet. We are not doing the DNA signature yet. That's a bigger project than what we can do for now. But we are doing the phytochemical property of each of the plants, which is quite a way to go already. And of course, there's the African herbal pharmacopoeia. We are supporting that in terms of the making sure that what we are registering and the database structure is in compliance with that. So in general, that's kind of the big picture of indigenous plants. I also want to talk about the trade of it, because we cannot talk about the plant without the economic empowerment. And I thought to talk about the trade, we look at the global trade activity before the African Free Trade Agreement, because we have done this map before the agreement. And what we did was to look at some key, we took a sample and we look at some key countries just to look at how trade looks. So the picture you are looking at is basically the volume of trade within sampled countries. Okay, I call them the nervous system, the financial nervous system of the world. So you can see the US to China to Japan to Europe, and you see some activity in Africa. What I want to draw out from this is you look at the next map, which I just pulled up. That's looking at things originating from African countries. You look at, I just took a sample. You look at Senegal, you look at Nigeria, and you look at Kenya. You can see that most of our trade are still externally. They are not intra-Africa, as you can see on that map. And I'm hoping that with the African Continent Free Trade Agreement, which started last summer, I'm hoping that will change the picture. Now, where I'm going with this is, if we look at, as we keep that in mind, and we think about commodity trade, because we want to get the indigenous plants to be a commodity, they are highly in demand, they command high value, the end products, which are either cosmetics, pharmaceutical, medicinal, these are all very, very high value produce or products in the marketplace. But today, we don't have the key elements that we need to be able to get those indigenous plants and even the rural agricultural production in the continent to that level. So so what we are proposing is a mobile commodity exchange. We actually have a mandate to implement this in, by the government of Cameroon. So the key element of what we are trying to do briefly is you want an exchange that is reliable, is trusted. You want the seller and the buyer to be able to meet in one digital platform. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be physical, it could be digital, but you want them to meet in one place, not going through multi-layer intermediaries, which is why the rural producers that are the biggest laborer, they are the one that gets the least of the money. Especially, in Africa, most of these women, most of the farmers are women that are actually tilling the soil. So it always breaks my heart when I think about that. So this is where I'm trying to get to. And there's something I really want to show you, which is this map. If anything at all we take away from this discussion, I want you to take this map away from you, have it at the back of your mind, and always think about it. So as I look at this graph, I will show you what it is. We did this research at the Media Lab. I went through the US Fed accounts, and we pull out different accounts to be able to analyze. But actually, this particular graph is, is a report that was published by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And briefly, if I will take you to year 2011, which is the last year, the red line at the bottom, the red trend line, that is the actual physical commodities traded, okay, in the US. Okay, this would be your oil, your energy, your agricultural products, pork bellies, gold, and so on. So in 2011, the value is $3 trillion. Now, we have what we call the notional value, which would be the contracts, the futures, the financial derivatives, and so on and so forth. in a layman's language, these are the multipliers effect of that transaction. So for $3 trillion transaction, you have a 34.5 trillion. Okay, I want us to think about that for a minute. So that's the green line on top. Okay, you can see the green line right there, and you see the 34.5. So the differential is 31.5. So that's the multiplier effect, which means this has multiplied itself by more than 1,100 percentage points, not 100, not 300, not 500, but 1,100 percentage points. Now, just imagine if we can have most of the indigenous plant, most of the African agricultural produce in this type of activity, where we have a commodity platform, where they are traded, where we can trade the futures, where we can trade the contract, where we can build financial derivatives, and so on and so forth. This will change completely the story of Africa, without a doubt in my mind, because the GDP effect would be so huge. We don't need the 1,100. I'm not aspiring to that. If we can have a portion of that, that basically changes the picture completely. So I will highly recommend that you keep this in mind, and I will just briefly show you, kind of round up a little bit here. So the kind of market structure, I think we support what I just said. It's a distributed, Africa is noted for their distributed markets, and we have to have a commodity market that is tuned to that. So, and the blockchain distributed ledger technology fulfills this mission. So if you just think about the nodes of the blockchain as each market, and each market basically at the local level, they add up to the national level. And you can see how everybody is interconnected, and they kind of support each other. So this is kind of my vision of what commodity exchange or the marketplace should look like. So what we have done so far, we have built the mobile application, which allows us to do all the things I just talked about. So you have the crop, the agricultural produce. We have the mobile platform or the mobile application. We have the certification process, and the farmers are tested to, and eventually the transaction is executed and also rated based on the activities. Okay. So again, we are getting mostly to the last end of this. We have done a first phase where we have done the pilot. We built the mobile app, as you can see here. And one thing I wanted to emphasize is here are the list of, sorry, you can't see it as much, but that's the list of the indigenous plants that we already attested to and confirmed. You can see how they are listed in there. On the right, Mr. Usman Diallo, actually this was a Senegal pilot that we did. I just want to emphasize the figure you see right here because it's important. You see here a rating of 9.0. Actually, what we are referring to there, that is the reputation index, which is the trustworthiness. So each transaction, each person that participates in the process, either you are a seller, you are a buyer, you are a transporter, whoever you are, if you participate in the marketplace, you are registered. You are also rated in terms of your what we call the E-Registry, which is your reputation index. That tells us how trustworthy you are. And this is based, again, on the what I call the community risk system, which is actually not new to African countries because we always have the elders and the respected people and people that have knowledge. And now what we are trying to do with that knowledge is to digitize it and make sure that this comes to play as we look at activities like this. So basically, again, this is the list of the plants, and I just want to show you how that flows briefly. We are in compliance with most of the sustainable, the SDG goals. And there are 8 of them that we can directly identify as something we are attest to. And lastly, and as a point of reference, again, I mentioned the Nagoya Protocol before. And we cannot talk about the indigenous plant without discussing the Nagoya Protocol. The Nagoya Protocol gives access to genetic resources and also a fair and equitable trade between countries. It is not mandatory, and countries have to ratify the Nagoya Protocol. Not all countries of the world ratified them. I believe US is one of them that hasn't ratified them. And again, you can say there is a political motive to it, but most of the countries that ratify them, they want to be able to have an exchange of ideas. And then secondly, if you ratify them, you also need to actually sign an agreement, which now will allow the parties to be able to trade. You can be a ratifier without being a participant in the agreement. So, but you cannot be in the agreement without ratifying, obviously. So these are all key elements that play into the indigenous plan, because that also highlights the right of individuals and how we trade, which I still believe is a concern today as we move forward, because we don't have this type of platform that can arbitrate between the traders and the buyers and the sellers. I just hope that at one point we'll be able to get into that kind of platform. So hopefully that gives you a tiny little taste of what the indigenous plant environment is. I look forward to a lot of the questions, and I hope we can be back to talk more and dig deeper. This is a passion of mine, and I'm glad we are making progress in it. So Nick, thank you so much. I look forward to all the questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Julius. I think you gave us a bit more of a taste there, actually. It's some absolutely fascinating insights, and the ambition and scale of the project is absolutely, well, it's overwhelming in some ways, because of course, like you say, when you look at the multiplier effect graph in particular, the potential to sort of change the GDP landscape across the country is incredibly exciting. Now you were talking. I've got a few questions. A few questions have already come in on the chat. Just a quick reminder to everyone watching the live stream via the BOBAB platform. Please feel free to write your questions, to post your questions on using the chat on the right hand side. Most of you should see that straight away. You might have to click the show chat button in the right hand corner, but please write your questions there. So as more questions come in, I've got a couple of my own. You mentioned at the end there the Nagoya Protocol, and for those of us watching who don't know what that is, it's a 2010 supplementary agreement to the 1992 Convention on Biological Diversity, the aim of which is the implementation of one of the 3 core objectives of the CBD, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of utilization of genetic resources, helping to contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Just a little bit more about how your platform could integrate with that. To what extent do you believe the Nagoya Protocol has been effective so far, and where and how do you envisage the e-bank integrating with, supporting, or indeed improving on some aspects of the protocol so far? Okay,
so the Nagoya Protocol is a good protocol, and of course, any protocol that you have, it doesn't matter how good the policy is, without the participation of the members, then it's not as effective. And in this case, as I mentioned before, you have people that ratify the protocol. And what that means is, okay, they agree with the policy, but it doesn't mean they're going to do it. And when you actually party to the contract, that's when you agree to do it. And but even doing it, that depends on the members that are also party to the contract. So what Nagoya Protocol has done is to some extent a good thing, because some countries are able to trade their indigenous plants and knowledge with some other people, but in a fair and equitable way. And how we define fair and equitable, that depends on the parties concerned, which is part of my concern. And so when you ask how does the Nature E-Bank play into this, we can look at that from fair and equitable fair trade point of view. The Nature E-Bank will be a platform to do that, because we are opening it up to participants. Again, to to your point, I'm glad you mentioned this, because earlier on I had talked about the need for a commodity place, or for a commodity marketplace, where you have the buyer and the seller coming together in an open environment. Then you stand a good chance of having a fair trade. But when you go one-on-one and everybody is doing their own thing, then you don't have the global view and the market view, the free play. You don't have that. Everybody is just trying to do their own thing. So the Nature E-Bank would be a good, would be a value added to the Nagoya Protocol, because it can be the arbitrator of fair price, because everybody can do, basically it's not ours, it's not theirs, it's all of ours. People can trade on it. They can, they can look at it and look at the type of product they want to trade. So I think that would be a good thing. But again, the Nagoya Protocol is a little more complicated than just the protocol. As I mentioned, you have to have a party. And then when you have parties deal with each other directly, as opposed to in an open marketplace, which is what we are trying to put, I mean, at least what we are trying to root for is to have it in an open marketplace.
Got you. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I suppose it's directly trying to address some of the shortcomings of the Nagoya Protocol. So yes. That's interesting. Okay. We've got some questions coming in from viewers. We've got one from Jimmy. This actually might link in with the Nagoya Protocol in terms of ratification and things. I'm not sure. You tell me. But he asks, what type of government intervention / policy do you need, if any, to make the e-bank and the platform work? Do you need to be engaged with governments, or can you bypass government?
We yes and no. We can do this without the government. As I mentioned before, the government of Cameroon, for example, gave us a mandate to do the mobile marketplace, which includes the Nature E-Bank. Now, we don't need them to do any of that. However, when we restrict it specifically to the indigenous plants, which is, in general, the genetic assets, as there's a big umbrella of genetic assets, which is very tied to traditional knowledge, and as well as the indigenous plants. So all of that need government intervention, because those things that are endemic, they are native and restricted to each area. Then the government is the authority, and it doesn't mean the government trade in it. So if it's in Julius's farm, I'm in Nigeria, so I can trade them. But the sovereign intellectual property belongs to the country and the people. So the government needs some involvement by policy point of view. We can talk more, and I've talked with a lot of different governments on this in terms of how they want to do this. Some of them want to look at some taxation that will allow them to derive some revenue on it. But how they do that, either based on individual trade or based on companies coming into trade, and so on and so forth. That will depend on each country. But yes, the government has a part to play when it comes to the genetic assets under which indigenous plant and traditional knowledge falls into. But if we are looking at just the agricultural commodity, we would prefer, and we don't need government to be involved, because that's a fair play, and the government, does their own thing, like they would trade locally, but we don't need their involvement in the marketplace.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Thank you very much. I hope that answers your question, Jimmy. Thanks very much for posting it. I've got another question which is, I guess, more about framing the context of the commodity exchange you're talking about, in the context of traditional commodity exchanges. And of the 12 or so commodity exchanges in Africa, just a few you can call successful. The Ethiopia Commodity Exchange is one of them. Among the challenges of establishing a viable sort of traditional commodity exchange in Africa are, the lack of infrastructure, so warehousing, transportation, processing plants, enabling laws, poorly designed government interventions, competitions from commodities boards, and the inabilities of commodity markets to attract the mainstream financial sector. I just, because that's how I understand commodities market. I just wonder, are these challenges still relevant for the e-bank, and if so, how does the e-bank help navigate these issues?
Right. Actually, so by my own or our environment, I would generally say most of the commodity markets in African countries have not been as successful. Not the Ethiopian, not the Joburg. Nigeria has one. And the reason they haven't been as successful is because we are trying to follow the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is a centralized commodity exchange where we expect people to come, where is controlled out of a centralized location. But our commodity, our markets in African countries are distributed. And most of the produce is coming out of the rural farmers. And that's why we believe there has to be a decentralized marketplace. And, again, when you look at Ethiopian commodity exchange, for example, it hasn't been as successful as we expected, and it's still having a lot of problems. My take on it is most of the commodities we need to trade, the volume of it that we need to trade resides in the rural areas, where the rural farmers are still the biggest producer, even though you have the commercialized agriculture and so on. Now, one of the biggest opportunities, where I call it problem, but for each problem, there's an opportunity, is the fact that a lot of those commodities, we do not trade the futures. Remember the multiplier effect I talked about on that graph is because we are trading the futures, the contracts. So I take an example. If I'm in South Africa, there's no reason why Sheraton in Joburg cannot have a 6 months banana contract with a rural farmer. Okay, wherefore it has a futures, and then the rural farmer can have some of the money up front. They produce in 6 months, and then that 6 months they get their produce. And in that case, we minimize the storage. We minimize because we have a futures contract. We know when to go and deliver. So we create part of what we are creating in the UN platform for the commodity trade is the transportation on demand. If you know the futures and the delivery, we schedule them accordingly because storage is always a problem. It will always be a problem, and it needs a lot of capital to be able to do that. And we will get there, but we have to start from somewhere. So those are some of the challenges I see and how we can fix them. So by leveraging the distributed marketplace and creating the transportation on demand, having the future contract, having the forward contracts, and being able to have all of these things in place, which is not, this is not too complicated to do. Okay, yes, we can do it. And do we need the data? Absolutely. We can manage that with the data, and then the registry and the authentication, the reputation index, the trustworthiness, all of that comes to play. So I think if we do that, we will be able to get there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I've got another question from a viewer, Mary, who says, very interesting so far. You mentioned women do most of the farming. So as you know, many of the livelihoods of African women rely upon the stability of the environment around them, and its decline has impacted women disproportionately to men. What considerations have you given to how the platform can support gender inclusivity across Africa?
Okay. Actually, this is fine. I like that question. Thank you so much for that. So again, when you think about what I just talked about, unfortunately, because of time, I didn't go as detailed as I could have gone. So for each registry, when we do the registry of producers, we register everybody. So if you have the Akinyemi family, you will register Mr. Akinyemi, Mrs. Akinyemi, Master Akinyemi, and everybody in the family. We will register them by their function. Okay. So each registry in the household, we have the household, we have their function. And from what we observe, actually, a lot of this has to do with the fact that most of the family, husband and wife, work together in the farm, so they become the labor for the farm. So what we are now trying to do without forcing anybody is to make sure that the revenue from the farm is not just attributable to Mr. Akinyemi, but the labor, the co-labor that support that revenue production, and the women that carry it, not only do they till the soil and labor for it, they carry it to the market and then they bring the money home. We want to make sure that there's equity provisioning within the family. And again, this is not, it's something we would promote. It's not something we can enforce. The idea is revenue coming from the farm and the asset ownership of the farm should be co-owned by the by the family, not just the husband, which is traditionally the way in Africa, but there has to be a co-ownership that we promote, and it's something that I'm very, very keen about.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, and I hope that answers your question as well, Mary. Okay, we've got a couple of questions and queries come in from viewers as well. So Jimmy asks again, how accessible cost-wise is the technology? Do you anticipate it being used more widely, i.e. becoming the standard in agri-tech on the continent? And then Robert asked for a bit more clarification on understanding who the market actors are. Does it work with farmers or aggregators? Who are the buyers? So perhaps we could just have a little bit more of an explanation on how people interact with the platform and how they benefit from it more directly.
Right. So everybody, basically everybody is a player in the marketplace. What I mean by that is when you look at, let me give you a specific example where the obvious ones, you have the producer, the farmer who is actually producing the product, obviously is a participant. You have the middlemen. The middlemen are participants, even though, I've talked about how they do not give revenue to the producer, but they are part of the system. They are part of the value chain. So they are participants. And then you have the buyer. They are also participants. So in effect, if, for example, Nestle is going to Republic of Congo to buy coffee or cocoa, or going to Ivory Coast, so Nestle become a participant on the platform. They have to register. Okay, we have to know them. We have to know who they are. The middleman who is working for them has to register. The producer has to register. The local authorities that are helping us to authenticate each person that yes, this farmer has this, they are participants. The driver who is going to drive that produce to deliver, they too are participants. So when you look at the value chain, every stop on the value chain, every function in the value chain, they are all participants, including some of the academia that are going to come in and do research. They too are participants. So this is, again, this is a platform that we are saying, if you are going to be if you are going to do anything that has to do with the trading platform, we want to know you, because that's the only way we can authenticate you, that we can rely on you, that we can actually give you a reputation index, which is critical. And for all of transactions, each transaction has to be authenticated. It doesn't matter that you do this transaction frequently or not. Each one of them, each time, has to be authenticated by somebody that is an attester. So hopefully that answers the who is participating. Everybody that wants to trade participate, including government, by the way. So let me clarify that. When I say including government, from the trading policy point of view. not necessarily from the actual trading. They don't arbitrate trading. They don't get involved in the trading. But of course, there has to be a policy that we comply with, just like we will have an SEC policy and so on. So yes, they will participate from that point of view. Now, the cost of entry, once we have this open and running, anyone can enter. But the cost is to us in terms of raising the fund to actually have the platform available. So there's no cost to the participants other than just registering yourself. Once you are registered and we authenticate you, then you can participate in the marketplace.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much. I hope that answers everyone's questions. We have about another 5 minutes, so I'm going to go one or two more questions from viewers, and I've got one or two of my own. We'll see how we do. Okay, Robert has a technical question for you, Julius. How can you ensure standardized quality of the indigenous plant products, for example, given the inherent variation of active ingredients due to age, season, soils, etc.?
Absolutely. Perfect. That's a good question. So actually, on the sample that I gave, that we did in Mauritius, we actually did the phytochemical properties, and at least that's the level where we are at this point, and the condition of the plants will dictate what kind of phytochemical properties we get out of it. But as I mentioned, ultimately, what we want to do is also get the DNA signature. Okay, so with the DNA signature, that would be our ultimate answer to that question. But for the time being, we can go as far as the phytochemical property. And yes, there will be a variation, but in most parts, we don't think there will be a great variance from what we will already have tested in the lab, because each variation we take to the lab to test and make sure that we have the phytochemical property. So that's how we monitor that for the time being. And yes, I think somebody asked if we want to see this globally. Yes, the answer is yes, we want to start with the developing countries that are focused on Africa. And then actually, we are talking with the Amazonia fourth industrial revolution already, because they are very interested and we are working with them. So yes, we want to see this global.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much. Okay, and yeah, I have well, tell me if this is too big a leap, but you know, we're in another lockdown here in London, all because of COVID. So it's hard to stop thinking about COVID in some way, shape, or form. And I know that biodiversity loss is a key driver for emerging infectious disease generally. Poses a variety of other risks to business, society, and the global economy. Do you think that the e-bank could be used specifically in conservation efforts to help sort of protect biodiversity and to help mitigate against risks like exposure to emerging infectious diseases, or is that too far down the line?
No. Actually, so that's an excellent question, and I try to summarize is something that we can actually dig deeper on. My take on that would be yes. This is yes from the point of view. I think we are all familiar. At the beginning of COVID, everybody will remember that Madagascar came up with some of the extract from some of their plants. I can't remember the exact one, but I just remember reading it. I didn't have chance to actually dig deep into it at that time. And everybody talked about it, but the WHO said, well, we don't know what it is. We cannot support it because there's no peer review. Okay. So to your point, yes, when we start looking at this and we look at the elements and the medicinal purposes of each one of them, what we haven't done that we need to do is to be able to create a lab that would be able to have a peer review and what we claim for it to be able to do that. And then we will have ability to improve. I strongly believe in, again, I'm a living example. Growing up in Nigeria, I remember when I was a kid, when we have fever, malaria fever, my grandfather used to go to the farm, take the back of one thing, they cook it up, you drink it at night. The morning you are bouncing as if nothing ever happened. So I was using this as an example, actually, at WIPO, because we had this discussion. It's an excellent question, and it's a question that keeps on coming back each time we have this discussion. And I told the Director General of WIPO's lab, look, I said, I'm a living lab because I've done it. I said, but you don't have, I said, I can't show you any paper that says, yeah, it's how it was done. And again, that goes back to our traditional knowledge of how we do this. And again, part of what we are trying to include in the Nature E-Bank is also the traditional knowledge. So there's a difference between the indigenous plant and the traditional asset. And then the traditional knowledge is the know-how on how to use these plants, either for medicinal purposes or otherwise. So until we start documenting that, which I believe the Nature E-Bank that we are creating, that's what we are trying to do. So we will be able to do that. And that coupled with other ideas that we are still working on in terms of monitoring, some of the environmental elements, temperature, blood pressure level, breathing level, and so on and so forth. When we combine all of that, yes, I believe we will be able to use this environment and the indigenous plant as part of the solution to the world.
Okay, all right, good. That's good to know as we enter yet another lockdown. All right, wonderful. Just one final question then, and this is from Perez Ochieng. She says they run a herbal shop in the UK and would be interested in buying, I assume, buying in materials from and plants from Africa, but the UK regulations on medicinal herbs are very strict. Do you see these plants being traded as medicinal plants, or are they just herbs? Because apparently, I'm no expert, but apparently the import rules are different on two, are different for medicinal and herbs. Yeah, so I guess a question of authentication again there.
All right. So what we want to do, we want to see this as a commodity, okay, which is a whole different thing. So the herbal label put a lot of medicinal requirement on that. But if you just see it as a commodity that is traded, and it has to comply with the commodity trading requirement, the quality, the upfront information dissemination. And of course, layered on top of that, let's not forget that the Nagoya Protocol also plays into that. So if you are importing from one country to the other, again, if they are not party to the Nagoya, or if they don't have reciprocity agreement separately, then you won't be able to do that. So there are the answer to that question depends on the country. Each country has their own condition and regulations. But from my point of view, I like to see it as a commodity trade that is universal, because commodities are fungible, okay? Meaning when you have one, they are the same everywhere, okay? Either it's endemic to Mauritius, but you have it available everywhere where they are licensed to trade. So based on that, we would like to see more of a commodity. That we don't want to be a pharmacist or medicine or anything like that. We just want to make sure that these plants are economically valued and compensated when they are used or traded. That's kind of what I would like to see.
Right, I see. Okay, so commodity kind of unifies everything.
Exactly.
Of what it is, as long as it's the same and it's traceable, it should.
Exactly.
Right, okay, I get you.
Exactly,
okay.
But in compliance with the local regulation, because the regulation overrules, if they say, well, you can't trade my wood cassava with Europe because we don't have the agreement, reciprocity, then that you can't do anything about that. But that's not always the case. They want to trade, and of course, everybody wants to improve their economic condition.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much, Perez. I hope that answers your question. I believe, Julius, you left some contact details on the presentation. So
Yes,
if people would like to perhaps follow up, they can get in touch with you.
absolutely.
There are lots of other questions that unfortunately we haven't had time to cover today. But I just want to say thank you again for a really fascinating presentation. It's incredibly
Thank you.
exciting, the potential, and
Thank
hopefully
you.
we can see it developed in the not too distant future.
Thank
Thank
you.
you everyone for tuning in and watching, and thank you all for your questions. We really appreciate it. We'll have more details of upcoming events on the Bobab platform soon, so tune in, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to participate. Thanks, Nick.
Cheers, Julius.